Imagine a podcaster who's been going for a couple of years, and every time they check their stats, the number seems to be the same. Let's say it's around 400 downloads per episode, and they naturally assume that they've hit a plateau. So they spend more money on marketing, push harder on promotion, but still the number doesn't move. Here's what that download number doesn't show. Behind the scenes, they're attracting plenty of new listeners, but they're losing just as many at the same time. Their audience isn't flat, it's leaking. Growth is happening, but churn is happening just the same. And the single metric that they're watching hides both. Today I'm talking to Dan Meisner of Bumper about why downloads alone can completely mislead podcasters and how to measure your podcast in a way that actually reflects reality. Welcome to Podcraft, Dan, and that wee anecdote that I've just given might be hypothetical, but for many folks out there listening who use downloads as their only performance metric, it could actually be the reality.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you highlighted downloads as a yardstick or a measure of audience size. I'm also glad that you mentioned the distinction between sort of regular returning listeners and net new listeners. And so I think we should start with the download, because the download, I think for many people, is the default way of thinking about success for a podcast. It's certainly an easy number to count, which is part of why so many people pay attention to it. It's also pretty universally applied, regardless of where you host your show, regardless of which podcast app, if it's a traditional RSS-based podcast app, downloads the files. It's kind of, I think of it as a lowest common denominator kind of measure. It's nearly everywhere in podcasting. And the download, I think for many years was an okay proxy for audience size. But I think over the past couple of years, we've seen a number of reasons to think about the download as a decreasingly useful proxy measure for audience. And the reason I say that is because 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, Apple very significantly changed the way that automatic downloads work in the Apple Podcasts app. We've seen since then, Spotify very significantly push into video and encourage more podcasters to publish video on the platform, which cuts downloads out of the loop entirely. And we have seen an increase in discovery and consumption among podcast consumers on platforms like YouTube, where the download doesn't factor in at all. And so very regularly here at Bumper, we work with teams who are looking at their download number and they're seeing it flat or even decline, and they're concerned because they think their audience size is declining, when in fact, that is very often not the case. It is entirely possible for the download number, which is really just a technical measure of how many files were transferred from one place to another. That download number can be flat or declining, while your true audience size, as measured in actual people hitting play and spending time with the show, that number may be increasing. And so from Bumper's point of view, the download was never a very accurate proxy for audience size. And I think it's getting a lot worse as we see more and more consumption on platforms like Spotify and YouTube that don't generate downloads in the way that a lot of traditional RSS-based podcast apps do. So I think the first thing I would say there is downloads aren't a great yardstick for measuring your audience size. And then there's the second part that you just talked about, which is new listeners versus returning listeners. And if your show wants to grow, you kind of need both of those things. You need new people coming through the door. You need new people to try your show. You need new people to sample your show. You need to constantly be getting in front of new people for whom your show could serve a purpose, fill a role in their lives, provide them some benefit. You got to get in front of net new people, but getting in front of new people isn't enough. You got to get those new people to come back. Ideally, again and again and again, episode after episode, season after season, year after year. And so I think you've highlighted three different elements that are very, very tightly related, but here at Bumper, we are way more interested in audience size measured in people than audience size measured in downloads.
Yeah, I suppose for the listener, they might be thinking, well, downloads, they don't tell the full story, but that seems to be all I've got. So, I mean,
Yeah.
what more can I know that you guys provide a solution with Bumper, and also we've got analytics, don't we? Like say Apple Podcast Connect and
Yes.
Spotify. So there's ways they could kind of dig in there to get some sample size, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I think it's wonderful that at this point, more than 20 years into the existence of podcasts as a medium, many of the apps that people use to consume podcasts give publishers and creators and individual podcasters a tremendous amount of very useful data, right? And it's not based on download figures. You can log into Apple Podcasts Connect. You can log into Spotify for creators. You can log into YouTube Studio. And all three of those platforms provide incredibly actionable, very, very useful insights if you know where to look and if you can, find the time in your routine or your workflow to pay attention to those signals. Uh, and of course, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube are not the only places that people consume podcasts, but in many markets, certainly many North American markets, they represent the lion's share of consumption. And, the numbers that I've seen suggest between the three of them, Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, that's about 75%, three-quarters of many shows or many networks consumption. So is it total coverage between those three apps? Absolutely not. Is it enough signal to be useful and to make marketing decisions or editorial or content decisions based on? I think so. And so for $0, you can spend time logging into Apple, spend time logging into Spotify, spend time logging into YouTube Studio, and you can get a really clear picture of what your audience is telling you, not when they write in or engage on social, not when they leave a comment and type words into a box on the internet, but when they simply vote with their play buttons.
When you were putting the Bumper dashboard together, what were some of the metrics that you really wanted to be able to present to the user?
We are very interested in the things that are stable and consistent over time. It seems like in the world of podcast measurement, stuff changes very frequently. The IAB comes out with a new version of their download measurement guidelines. That happens every once in a while. Spotify, just this year, removed one of their metrics called starts and added a new metric called plays. YouTube this year changed how views are counted on shorts, right? There are a lot of podcast measurement elements that feel like they're always changing or changing very frequently. So when we built the Bumper dashboard, we were really interested in stuff that stays stable over time. And those three things for us are people, how many actual human beings hit play on an episode of my show. So what is the people number? Playback, which is somebody with intention, not an autoplay, not something that happened because I scrolled a preview into view and it came alive on my screen, but somebody with intent actually hit a play button and stuck around for a little while. So people number, playback number, and time spent. How many hours, how many days, how many weeks, how many months, how many years of people's time have we been able to earn? Those three things, human beings hitting play and spending time with the show, the actual jargon that the platforms use to describe those activities may change. But fundamentally, most of the podcasters that we work with are interested in how many people did we reach? How frequently were they hitting play? How frequently were they coming back? And how much time and attention did we earn? So people, playback, time spent, that's really the lens that we use to think about podcast audience growth and podcast audience engagement.
You said something quite profound. I thought you were chatting to Sam Sethi the other week on the Pod News Weekly review, and something you said kind of made me stop and think about it. And I'm paraphrasing you here, but I think it was you were saying that what is good for finding new listeners doesn't necessarily serve the listeners that you have. Do you think we've got a slight problem in podcasting? And I put myself in this camp that we think about growth and we don't think as much about retention as we maybe should, because that's arguably more important, I guess.
I think that for many shows, the most important thing is the ongoing opt-in relationship that a show builds with its audience. And then the audience builds back with the creator, with the host, with the people behind the show. Some of my favorite shows I've been listening to for years, decades in some cases, right? I have a really loyal, ongoing relationship with those shows. And when they tell me I should check something out, there's a pretty high likelihood I will. There's a level of trust, there's an ongoing relationship there. And so I'm not saying every show is this way, but it can be really easy to chase the excitement of bringing in a big spike of new downloads, new listeners, new views, whatever you want to call them. It can be really enticing to chase a big spike, because who doesn't love a big spike? But what we have learned at Bumper in digging into some of the numbers here is that just because you can convince somebody to hit play once doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come back for a second episode or a third episode or a 10th episode or a 20th episode. And so if you want to grow a show, if you want the audience size for your show to be larger, you need to do two things. You got to get new people and you got to get some of those people to come back, right? Arithmetically, I don't think there's another way to increase the size of your show. And if you've got too many one and dones, too many people who come in, sample an episode, and then never come back, that might get you some spikes, but it's not going to pay long-term dividends. Moreover, if you only have long-term listeners, long-term loyal habitual fans, but you're not bringing enough new people in, well, we know how that story goes, because eventually, slowly over time, even those habitual listeners, some of them will churn. So I think you need both. You need to be bringing in new people and you need to be serving the existing audience, ideally an existing audience of regular habitual fans. I think we can use that word, fans. And to focus too much on net new or to focus too much on existing fan service, you don't want to be too far on either end of that spectrum. I think it's about finding the right balance for your show. And the right balance depends on how long you've been in market, how long you've been around. If you're a brand new show, most of your audience is going to be new because you're still picking all the low-hanging fruit. You're still got way more people who have never listened to your show than have listened to your show. But as shows get longer in the tooth, as they become more tenured, we were talking before we started recording about shows that have been on for years and years and years, many seasons. It gets harder because you've picked all the low-hanging fruit. And so I think the balance between new and returning is necessarily different show to show, depending on many factors, including how long has the show been around. It gets harder as time goes on to bring in new people because, again, you may have picked most of that low-hanging fruit already. But then there are other content categories. I think, our team works a lot on some shows that are in the parenting space. Well, the nice thing about parenting shows is there are new parents all the time. There's a fresh crop of brand new parents nearly every day, right? And so there are certain content categories that really make a whole lot of sense and have a natural replenishment of new audience over time. And then there are other kinds of shows or other topic areas that may not have that.
What about going back to like the hypothetical podcaster at the start? Say they realize now via Bumper or elsewhere that they've got like high churn, so they're managing to bring people in and they just can't keep them. They're sitting down looking at and reviewing their content. What are maybe some things that they could start to put in place to just retain a bit more of that churn?
Yeah. So if you've got a show and it looks like your audience is churning, either they're coming in once and not coming back a second time. Or you've got longer term listeners and that overall listener number is declining over time. I think you can reasonably call that churn. And I think one question I always ask is, if our show was a restaurant, what's keeping people from coming back? Is it something about the way that we market ourselves, the sign over the door or the ads that we go buy in the local newspaper to try and drag people into the restaurant? Or did we change our menu and people don't like the food we're cooking anymore, or they don't like it as much as the old way? And so if the question is it something about our show? Is it something about the guests that we're booking? Is it something about the way that we tell stories? Is it some production technique? We changed our theme music, or we went overboard with sound effects or some other production technique. I think I would start to look at, what are the individual episode level measures and how have those changed over time? So one of our favorite ways of looking at this is what we call listen time and average listen time. How much on average per episode per listener, how much time are we getting from people? If we're publishing an hour-long episode and the average amount of time we get per listener is 15 minutes, why are we making hour-long episodes? That might be a signal that enough people are not sticking around for all or most of the duration of an episode. So, to answer the question, is the food we're cooking not to people's tastes anymore? I would turn to some of those episode level measures. Per episode, how much time are we getting per person? And how does that compare to the actual duration of the episode? Very often, the best performing shows and the shows that are really sticky and have those loyal returning listeners and are effectively bringing in new people who don't just come once and then leave, but come in once and then come back again. Those are shows that tend to correlate very highly with high average listen time per episode. If you make an hour-long episode and the average amount of time spent per listener per episode is 45 minutes, 50 minutes, 55 minutes, odds are you got something that people are willing to stick all or most of the way through on. And so I hope that answers the question. I would turn to the sort of more editorial or content-focused metrics.
I think I've heard you say elsewhere as well, and this really aligns with my own thoughts, that podcasters can do a lot more with their back catalogue. Like if we have 30 or 50 or 100 episodes sitting there, and I was just talking about this on the last episode of Podcraft, we think about the next episode and, what we're going to do with that. We're going to do some promotion about it. And largely we ignore this huge body of work that's just sitting there. So there's a lot more we could do with that too, isn't there?
I think so. And what's nice is that there are many opportunities to do this within the podcast apps themselves, right? We work with a number of shows who have published thousands of episodes over the years, right? We work on one show where if you go to the feed, they have surpassed the 2,000 episode limit in Apple Podcasts, right? There's stuff that's just fallen off the bottom of the feed because there are so many episodes in the show. And what I think is wonderful is that some of the playback apps, and I'm thinking specifically of Spotify and YouTube, now offer really very useful features like playlists. You can put together themed playlists in Spotify, or you can put together a playlist on YouTube, and you can steer people to that playlist as a way of encouraging them to explore the back catalog. If it's your first time here, what are some great episodes to start with? Or if you're new to the show, where are the places that you should look first? Or if we do a bunch of different kinds of episodes and we can organize them together under themes, you could put together themed playlists and steer people to those. I know that Spotify has some features where you can, from within a single episode, link out to other episodes directly on Spotify. Of course, you can do this in your episode notes or your show notes. You could put those links there, but Spotify has some wonderful first-party features where if I've been on your show before, you could link back directly to a past appearance so that somebody just taps right on that and they're taken to it directly within the app that they're already listening too. So I think there are a number of features. Apple recently, I think, rolled out a similar feature where if I have a show and you have a show and I appear on your show and we simply mention the names of the show, Apple will link those two shows together, sort of show to show linkages within the Apple Podcasts app. And so anything we can do to encourage, especially brand new listeners, of all the ways that they can explore the back catalog, get value out of episodes from the past. Yeah, I think there's a lot of gold in them hills.
Have you been thinking about launching your podcast but struggling to actually get it done? Well, we're running a challenge in January. For 5 days, you'll get your podcast launched by the end of the week. So commit to those 5 days, come along, join the cohort, 20 people only. So really good, close support. We plan to give tons of feedback, answer all your questions. Starts on January the 12th and you'll have launched by January the 16th. Your podcast goes live that day, ready or not. So no decisions to make, no rabbit holes to fall into. It's just a case of do this thing and then you're done. So we'll be around to help you. Both me, Colin, and Matthew will be able to answer all your questions and get that podcast out there into the world. Go from thinking about it to published podcaster. If you fancy it, just go over to thepodcasthost.com/launch challenge and I'll put the link in the show notes as well. We'd love to see you there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of tactics I've always liked is if we think about Podcraft and maybe, over the last few years, say I've interviewed 8 to 10 creators and they've all given quite good insights on monetization. What I'll maybe do is take segments of those conversations and build a montage episode. And then in that montage episode, you're saying, by the way, get the full conversation over here. So you're essentially creating a really valuable episode, but you're promoting 10 other episodes. And then with stuff like that, you could really just keep people funneling back into the back catalogue, can't you?
Yeah, cross-pollination. And again, I think this is show dependent, right? Some shows that we work on are so of the moment and tied to the news cycle that the back catalog really doesn't have a whole lot of value the day after the episode was published, right? We work on some news shows and some current affairs shows. I tend not to listen to last week's news or last month's or last year's. But there are other kinds of shows where that back catalog can do incredibly well, right? One of our clients at Bumper is an English language learning show, ESL show for language learning development. Phrasal verbs have always been phrasal verbs and will continue to be phrasal verbs for a long time, and people will continue to struggle with phrasal verbs. And so back catalog episodes all about phrasal verbs continue to do really, really well because it's a perennial topic. So I don't think there's one size fits all guidance here, but I think the general principle that you just described, which is, make the most out of your back catalog episodes and not just focus on what's coming out next episode, what's coming out next week. I think that's great advice for nearly every podcaster who's got anything in the back catalog.
So I'm just clicking over to my Bumper dashboard at the moment for Podcraft. So just talking us through some of the things that I'm looking at here. I know I've not literally got a screencast in front of me, but I'll sort that out in the show notes. But so we've got 3 tabs here. I've got overview, loyalty, and episodes. So I heard you talk about loyalty quite a lot recently as I don't know if metric's the right term, but what do you kind of mean by loyalty? I risk asking a stupid question here.
No, it's a relatively new thing for our team, and it's something that we have wanted to know about for a very, very long time. When we talk about loyalty, we're really talking about repeat listener frequency. So how often are people coming back time and again? So if you look at your loyalty tab, I suspect you're going to see a couple of charts in there. The first one is showing either weekly or monthly sort of average number of days per listener per week or per month. And so you know how frequently you're publishing. You know the release cadence of your show. You know how many episodes you put out in a given month. The question is, for everyone who listened in the month of November, for every unique individual person, well, how many times did we see those people? If we published 10 episodes in a month and the average number of days that we saw the average listener is 1, we might be making more stuff than the average listener wants. And so this is, again, to sort of use a restaurant analogy, how frequently are people coming back to our restaurant? Of all the people who visited us in the month of November, how many days did we see them? The lowest number can be 1, right? Because you can't be a monthly listener without showing up at least once. But for shows that publish multiple episodes per month, you want that number to be right-sized to how much you're putting out. And of course, what right-sized means depends on your release frequency and the percentage of new and returning that are coming in during. So it's sort of different for daily shows than weekly shows than monthly shows. So it's essentially how frequently are people coming back within a short amount of time, like a week or a month. And then we also have what we call lifetime value, which is of everybody who has ever hit play on your show, whether they were one and done or they became a regular habitual listener over time and kept coming back. What is the average number of days that we have seen the average listener? And so 2 different ways to think about loyalty, but it's all about getting people to come back. The loyalty number goes up when you can get repeat listeners to come back again and again, and the loyalty number goes down when you fail to do that.
Yeah, great data just to scan through. You could lose a lot of time in here. So I'm seeing new audience as well. There's a little section there on new audience. Tell us a wee bit about that, please, Dan.
Yeah, new audience, I think, is important, especially when you're doing things to market your show. Because, of course, the goal is, we want to get the show in front of net new people. And when I say net new people, when we talk about new listeners, this is all tied back to Apple data and Spotify data. And the nice thing about Apple and Spotify is that they have this listener measure, which corresponds to actual user accounts or device IDs. So these are persistent identifiers over time. I haven't changed my Spotify account in years. If I log in today, I'm still Dan. If I log in a year from now with that same account, I am still Dan. It's a very sticky identifier over time. And so we can use some basic set theory and the numbers that Apple and Spotify give us to understand, of all of the people who listened to my show in a given week or a given month, how many of them were new, meaning that user account had never hit play on my show before. They are effectively hitting play on the show for the first time, so a new listener. And we can also, from that, calculate returning listener. And a returning listener is just anybody who is not new that month, right? If you are not a new listener, if you are not a brand new, net new person who has never hit play on the show before, then by definition, you are a returning listener. And so we find that new returning breakdown really, really helpful from a couple of different perspectives. One is, how should I be thinking about my audience? If half my audience is new every single month, I might need to create a more welcoming environment for those people. And I can't presume that they're deeply familiar with me, the personalities on my show, the topic area that we cover. You can't presume a whole lot when much of your audience is brand new. Similarly, with returning listeners, it's a really good gauge of how strong is that core group of people who aren't just here for the first time, but have visited me at some point in the past and are returning. So those 2 numbers taken together, I think, can be a good measure of, are we bringing in a healthy number of new people, and are we holding on to a reasonable number of returning listeners? With the understanding that not every new listener is going to become a super fan immediately, and it's okay to bring in new listeners who decide that your show is not for them. I've listened to a lot of episodes where I've been one and done because I hit play, I checked it out, it wasn't for me, and that's fine.
Yeah, you were just talking about the returning audience as well there, and then down at the bottom I'm seeing average episodes per verified listener. So what are we learning down here at the bottom?
This is really similar to what I mentioned earlier about are we making too much stuff? Are we not making enough stuff? Right. So you can compare the output of your show in episodes per week or episodes per month. You know how many episodes you're publishing and at what frequency. But what is the average number of episodes consumed per listener in a given time frame? And so this is all about, are we not making enough stuff to meet our audience's appetite, or are we making more stuff than the average listener wants to consume? And this can be really actionable, right? We were working with a show a little while ago. They were publishing daily, 5 episodes a week, Monday through Friday. And they looked at the average number of episodes per listener per week, and it was nowhere near 5 episodes a week. They realized they were making way more episodes than their average listener was actually consuming. And their single biggest cost, talent fees. So what did they do? They changed the number of episodes they published per week. They went from 5 episodes a week to 3 episodes a week. What did that do? Well, it saved them a considerable amount of cost because the talent fees became lower, and all the numbers that they cared about, people, playback, and time spent, stayed relatively stable. So a really, really nice way to sort of look at the output of your show versus the consumption of your show and right-size the output to what your audience is telling you when they vote with their play buttons.
You've given some good examples already of what clients have done with the data. What are other situations or anecdotes where a client's noticed certain analytics or data and they've been able to tweak something or change something to good effect?
I think from a marketing perspective, we've worked on a number of shows where that new returning breakdown has been really helpful, right, in assessing the effectiveness of a marketing campaign. There's no shortage of ways that you can market a podcast to try and get it in front of new people. And there's no shortage of ways that you can try and measure the effectiveness of those marketing campaigns, right? We spent some money or we spent some time trying to market a show. Did a number go up or did a number go down? The deeper question is, did we spend a bunch of time and money to get one and done listeners who weren't very qualified? And so they hit play, realized the show wasn't for them, and then never came back. And so we've absolutely used that new returning breakdown to understand how useful was that marketing campaign anyway? Was it just a spurt of net new listeners who many of them never returned? Or did it yield highly qualified listeners who we have strong evidence to support the idea that they came back for a second, a third, a 10th, a 20th episode? So I think, marketing effectiveness is a really useful application of this. I would also look at, the ways that you can drill down into a specific episode and look at the performance of a specific episode, average time spent per listener, or the minute by minute, second by second drop off curves. We've worked with teams who run ads within their show, and you can see the ad avoidance right there in the retention curves, right? You see the big ice cream scoop of people hitting fast forward through the ads or bailing on an episode because they hit an ad marker. These are very, very visible. And so with that kind of insight, you can see, where are we losing people? Where are we holding on to people within an episode? We've worked with teams who have absolutely figured out ways to restructure their shows or change the placement of ad markers within their shows to hold on to more people. And the nice effect of that is we know that platforms like Spotify and YouTube use that listen time data, how much time people are actually spending, in order to feed their algorithmic discovery systems, right? They want to surface episodes that people spend time with, right? And so if you can adjust things about the editorial or the structure of your episodes, you can tweak the placement of an ad marker such that you lose fewer people. That leads to more time spent, which tends to lead to positive impacts on algorithmic discovery, because the platforms themselves want to steer people towards episodes they know that people have in the past spent meaningful time with.
You've kind of answered this already partly, but I was going to ask about the client that was seen, they hit the ads and just lost a load of people, or a load of people stopped listening altogether. Like, what do you kind of do about that? If you're thinking, well, I need to pay the bills, I've got these ads to go in. Like, was it just a case of, like you're saying, they moved position, or did they redo the ads, or what?
I think placement of ads can have a really big impact on retention and overall time spent on an episode. And I think beyond the measurement piece of it, I am somebody who believes that every part of the show is part of the show, and that includes the ads. And it's remarkable to me what a crummy ad experience I get when I listen to some shows. Ads that are dynamically inserted and are way louder than the actual show that I'm listening to, or way quieter than the actual show that I'm listening to. Clumsy transitions where the ad interrupts somebody mid-sentence. I've heard so many bad ads and so many bad, especially dynamically inserted ads. And I think in addition to some of the technical pieces of this, there are also just taste considerations, right? I've heard some really distastefully placed or misplaced ads, right? I'm listening to a really emotional story where somebody might be at a very, telling something upsetting or distressing, or, somebody might be very, very emotional in an episode. And then I'm interrupted with an ad for, summertime beach balls at the beach, or something that is tonally completely inappropriate, right? And so I think one of the things I wish more teams would do would be to actually have a clearer sense of what their shows sound like when all the ads are in them, to make sure that, your listeners are getting a reasonable experience and not a disjointed or clunky or distasteful experience with those ads.
It's been a really good chat, Dan. I've really, really enjoyed it. I suppose, like, as we kind of come towards the end of our time, we are recording in December, so we're getting towards the end of a year and the start of a new one. I guess I think I like to sometimes ask folk is what's got you optimistic about podcasting? We're going into 2026 now. You will always see by nature, pessimistic stories or things not going quite so well. But what are you quite positive about in the medium at the moment?
I am very excited about greater transparency in podcasting. I think one of the things that I find very frustrating and have historically found frustrating is that there's so much opacity to podcasting and podcast measurement. It's really hard to know how other shows are doing. It's really hard to know how your show is doing compared to a year ago or 5 years ago, because as we said, so many things are changing. And from an advertising perspective, there's so much opacity. If I buy ads on a show, what am I really getting? When I buy ad impressions, what value am I actually getting? How many of those ads actually got played back? How many of those ads sat unlistened on somebody's device? There's a tremendous amount of opacity. And the thing that I am excited about in 2026 is more transparency, greater visibility, and a stronger focus on the fundamentals, which for us at Bumper are real people hitting play and spending time with shows. From every indication that we have in a macro sense, we've got access to a lot of podcast data. All of those numbers are growing. The people numbers are going up, the playback numbers are going up, and the time spent numbers are going up. Not for every show, but across the board, add them all together, all the shows that we've got measurement access to, the trend is going up. That is really encouraging. And I think sharing that story, telling that story, and building on the truth of people hitting play and spending time with shows rather than the kind of technical measure of downloads, that's what I'm excited about.
For the listener, then, where can they go to check out the Bumper dashboard?
We have a website at wearebumper.com, and there's a link right there to the dashboard. You can read more about it, and I believe you could sign up for a trial. So if you've got a show and you want to hook it up, you can create an account, log in, and connect all the data sources and get some of those views that we've been talking about today.
Massive thanks to Dan for a really insightful conversation. Links are in the show notes as ever, and I'll include a brilliant video tutorial that Colin put together recently of the bumper dashboard where you'll get a tour round and a peek at Podcraft's analytics. On top of that, I'll link to one that I did myself, showing you how to calculate your podcast's overall listen time in months or years. And you could do that even if the bumper dashboard is a wee bit out of your budget range right now. Alright, that is it for this episode of Podcraft. Thanks very much for listening, and Colin will be back next week.